And we're back like we never left. Oregon fans, what's going on? How we living? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres with Scoop Duck, and it is Sunday, May 5th, 2024. A big episode of the podcast in store for you guys as Dan Lanning and the Ducks add two big commitments from the transfer portal. Before we get into that, you guys know how it goes. The Ducks Dish podcast is brought to you in part by Ranchito Grill. Ranchito Grill in Springfield. Head on over there for some dinner tonight, 1537 Mohawk Boulevard. Try out their homemade tortillas. They have great food, a great environment, and they will take care of you. Say what's up to my guy, Ruben, and let him know that Max Torres sent you. Not rolling solo. I am very happy to be joined by my guy, Justin Hopkins, publisher and owner of scoopduck.com. J-Hop, man, how are we doing? It's been quite a weekend for the Ducks.
Yeah, I don't know how you could be a Duck fan and not be pretty excited at the last few days that have happened, at least, on the recruiting trail for Oregon and for Dan Lanning. Just remarkable work. Absolutely remarkable.
Some big-time additions added to the 2024 roster, and we got some fresh news this morning on Sunday as former Alabama safety Peyton Woodyard announced his commitment to the Ducks. He was on campus in Eugene this weekend for a visit, and we kind of had this feeling, Justin, that he wasn't going to leave town without being committed to Oregon, and you and I both had our RPM picks in favor of the Ducks. And, man, Dan Lanning and the Ducks just keep cooking with this latest edition.
Yeah, obviously Friday was a big day, and then you kind of put this massive cherry on top with Woodyard committing on Sunday. And, I mean, you just look at it from every, point. This makes so much sense. He's just such an explosive, just smart safety in that back end. Obviously, he's just getting started, hasn't even played a college down yet, technically, if we're not counting spring football. So, I mean, he's got so much room to grow. And I think this just is seamless for what Oregon wanted. I think they would like to have added a safety, in the transfer portal, but they wanted somebody that would have multiple years remaining. And obviously, as we know, Woodyard has at minimum 3 years left remaining. So, this just seems seamless. I don't know about you, but saw the pictures with Big Dave Ungalele and Mateo and Peyton, and it just looked like they were vibing and having a good time and talking about playing together again. All those things matched up really well, and credit to the staff for bringing Dave in this weekend, which I think helped, recruit Woodyard to Oregon. But to your point, I don't think Oregon was letting him leave Eugene without committing, and they certainly did that Sunday morning. And just what an incredible addition to an already incredible transfer portal class.
It just keeps getting better for Oregon, and their momentum is red hot going into the 2024 season. We have our highlights up Woodyard's highlights rather up here on the Scoop Duck YouTube channel. Reminder, if you guys are watching us here on YouTube, like, comment, and subscribe. As always, we're red hot on this YouTube channel, and it's been awesome getting on here with Justin and bringing you guys that good video content that you want. So a couple of just background notes for people on Woodyard if they don't know him. So class of 2024 out of Bellflower, California, St. John Bosco, Adidas All-American Bowl selection. He is a 4-star recruit on the On3 industry ranking, 93.6, the number 128 player nationally, number 7 safety, and the number 10 recruit in the state of California. We knew that it looked like a return out west, Justin, was in the cards for Woodyard. And again, that really kind of limits it as far as just Oregon, USC, UCLA, Washington. The other school that I had heard about in this recruitment was UCLA, but just of the 4 schools, the fit made a lot of sense for Woodyard as far as the defense here, being able to play for a national title contender and a defensive head coach. That's some continuity, if you will, from Saban to Dan Lanning. Like we've kind of been saying here, it just really felt like all the pieces fell into place for Oregon in their pursuit of Woodyard, and I think relationships on the staff played a big part.
Yeah, relationships on the staff, and we've talked about it. You've talked about it. It wasn't just Dan Lanning. It wasn't just Chris Hampton. It was Rashad Wadood and a lot of the other guys on staff. defensive analysts, GAs, whatever, that have those relationships. Talked about the relationship with the Ungaleles just a moment ago. You're back at St. John Bosco for Oregon, which is big because that's one of the top producing programs out west and nationally every year. Woodyard, again, we can talk about everything he does on the field, and he's a great player, tremendous instincts. But, again, we'll talk about this one more time. Tremendous young man, right? Just high character, very respectful. Like you said, every time you talk to him, very respectful. Same for me when I interacted with him. It's just he's going to come in that room and not create any waves, if you will, with the existing guys. So very important piece there. I'm almost like, I wrote about it after Harmon committed. And it's like, man, this certainly has the feeling of like a natty or bust type of a movement for Oregon. And that just meaning the recruiting that they've done and the fact that they've been able to keep both their coordinators this offseason and the transfer portal additions. And that was before Woodyard committed. And now it's like, man, you just got this guy, which most years Oregon would be counting on him coming in as a true freshman and starting and being a key contributor. Really, you got him this year, and it's kind of as a, hey, this guy's going to come in, probably learn behind some of the guys who are a little older than him, and really become a very complementary piece to what we're doing. So you just feel much better about the overall depth, 1 through 3, 1 through 4 in that safety room that Oregon's been able to assemble. And again, Woodyard, just what a tremendous pickup.
Well, let's stay in that safety room for a second here, Justin, because I want to look at just how this room projects in 2024. So Kobe Savage comes over from Kansas State and Tyshim Johnson returns for another year. I think it's pretty safe to say that those are looking like your two starters. And then you also have Duke transfer Brandon Johnson as your projected starter at nickel or star. He's not on campus just yet, but he's expected to join the Ducks in the summer. So I think you're feeling good about that first lineup. I think that Savage helps you with some of the coverage lapses that you had a year ago. I know that was an area where Tyshim Johnson wasn't necessarily the best last year, but that's not to say he's a bad player. I just think that's, the reality of where his game's at right now. So you bring in Savage to bolster that. And Brandon Johnson can cover too. He can cover, he can hit, he can fly all over the field. But let's look at that keyword, the depth. Those guys behind those starters. I think you have Aaron Flowers as a guy who has made as strong of a case as possible at this point for only being in Eugene for about 4 months to be in that rotation as another All-American, former All-American that the Ducks signed in the 2024 class. And you have Kingston Lopa as well, who came in the 2024 class. Maybe not someone who has as much acclaim, but I've heard that he is just like an athletic freak, 6'4", 6'5", super tall DB, maybe a Brian Addison type of a deal. And then behind that, I'm trying to make sure I don't miss anybody. You got Tyler Turner, who comes back, and Cody DeCambra entered the transfer portal. So you saw a little bit of movement at that spot. So I say all that to say that safety was kind of one of those question marks, and maybe it still is heading into this year just because you don't know necessarily what you're going to get out of Woodyard. But going into the Big Ten, the Ducks are going to face less passing offenses, which I think is good for them. And then you don't need Woodyard to start. You don't need him to play a big role. But if he can kind of just go in there and spell some guys when needed, I think that's really all you can ask for.
Yeah, it really, I liken it to the Dante Moore situation coming to Oregon, young quarterback that kind of looked for a situation where, hey, let me come in and develop and grow and find a spot where maybe in a year from now, maybe I'm the guy. And I think that's the case for Woodyard and Flowers. Those guys are both, I think, have just tons of upside, and they're going to be future guys, but they come in and you get to learn behind Savage, and you get to learn behind Johnson and Tyshim Johnson as well, Brandon and Tyshim Johnson. That's a great situation. They're going to see the field. They're going to get snaps. They're going to be playing meaningful snaps. So it's not like these guys are showing up and not even, seeing the field. They're going to play. It's just, maybe they're not the starter, the quote unquote starter, but still you're going to get to learn from guys with tons of experience. I think Flowers is a guy that I really have circled is going to be a major player at Oregon in the coming years. I think you could see Peyton Woodyard also being one of those guys as well that will really bolster that secondary. And to your point, for the last 2 years, I think safety has been one of Oregon's weakest position groups on the roster. It was a little better last year. It was not very good 2 years ago. Now you go into the season looking like, okay, we look really good with our starting three, and then we've got a couple guys behind them that might be young but can play meaningful snaps for us and won't be this massive drop off, where we just have lapses in the secondary. So Woodyard again, it was almost more of a luxury pickup, if you will, but it makes so much sense when you start to look at it and examine that room and how he fits. And again, we know Dan Lanning doesn't like to have, any shallow groups if he can avoid it. You don't want to have just three safeties and nobody behind him, because we know injuries are going to happen. Okay, maybe Kobe Savage is out for a game or half a game or whatever the case might be. You're going to need some of these guys to step up. And I think you feel pretty good about Woodyard, Flowers. And I think Lopa probably has a little bit more development in terms of some of that being ready. But you're right. That's a guy that just has freaky athleticism, is not afraid to come up and hit you. And you can't teach 6'4". So I think you give him a year or so, and you're looking at a really good group next year after those transfers have come and gone.
And just some more on this fit for Woodyard at Oregon. Being someone that got to spend a lot of time around St. John Bosco the past couple of years, Justin, there's multiple recruits that told me that St. John Bosco and Oregon runs some similar defenses, which I think obviously is going to help him kind of get up to speed and hit the ground running. And then we've talked in previous episodes of the podcast about just how much he was able to soak up in that spring football. With Kalen DeBoer, obviously, but also Nick Saban's there. He's kind of still got a role in Tuscaloosa, and that was the guy who recruited him and who he got to learn under during that college football playoff run. So I think that helps as well. And Woodyard's a bigger DB, 6'6.5", with about 200 pounds on his frame. So I think that helps. And I think also the other point to look at here with the safeties, Oregon's cornerback room is really crowded. So I wouldn't be shocked if they maybe tried to mess with a couple of guys and see if maybe they have a better fit at safety. I think maybe Solomon Davis could be one of those guys to watch there. He's been in town for a little bit, and I think that I'm hearing some good things about him.
Yeah, he's got length and athleticism, and that's a guy. It's a great point, Max, because Solomon Davis is a guy you can move around very easily, maybe slide him into nickel. The big question mark right now is Dalen Austin and what will happen with his situation, and will he be back? Want to be back? We don't know. It's part of the conversation at the very least. And so, yeah, and with Woodyard, with regards to Woodyard, I loved your, I think the point you were kind of making is, if Woodyard was in spring ball, it wasn't at Oregon, but if you're not at Oregon and you're getting somebody at spring ball, having them at Alabama is not a bad spot for them to be for spring ball. So there's no doubt it's different. Terminology will be different, some of that stuff, but he went and learned at a premier program, was around some really good competition, a great strength and conditioning program. And I think, you mentioned Woodyard being around 200 pounds. He's a pretty lean 200 pounds, right? I mean, he's chiseled up and he's in great shape. He's a good looking kid, but I think it's pretty easy to see you could add, 5 or 10 pounds onto him if you needed to, and in the right weight program. So just tons of things to like. And yeah, it's pretty amazing. I mean, a guy like this enters the portal, do not contact, tag. And next thing you know, just 4 or 5 days later, he's committed to Oregon. So pretty great work by Dan Lanning and company to kind of pull this thing together.
Ducks now have 13 total commitments in the transfer portal this offseason. To give my final remark on this Woodyard news, Justin, it kind of feels like it came full circle a little bit, just because I cover the Ducks and I spend a lot of time around Bosco, and Peyton was one of the first big time recruits that I covered. Mateo was the first. I got to cover him out when I came down for the spring showcase a couple years ago. So for Peyton to end up at Oregon is selfishly, I'm pretty excited, just because I got to cover him in high school, and it feels like a bit of a full circle moment, if you will.
Well, so I worked with Dan Lanning on that. I said, hey, Dan, I'm going to add Max via the transfer portal. Can you go get Peyton Woodyard for him? And he agreed to it. So
It's been a crazy transfer portal this offseason, and obviously I'm fired up to be back at Scoop Duck and with On3 now. We're talking on the YouTube channel here, you guys, talking some Oregon football recruiting with my guy Jay Hop, as the Ducks go into the portal again to add former Alabama safety Peyton Woodyard. But Justin, that's not the only addition that we have to talk about. My God, Friday, what a day. As former Michigan State defensive lineman Derrick Harmon announced his commitment to the Ducks not long after Nasir Wyatt announced his commitment to the Ducks, the coveted Southern California linebacker. And Justin, I just want to peel back the curtain here a little bit for the fans. I don't think I'm sharing too much here, but when that news broke, we were kind of, doing our thing. I was actually on the phone with Nasir Wyatt doing the interview. And then I have, all my windows up. And then I get a text from J Hop and it's like, oh my God, Harmon just committed. And I was like, when it rains, it pours. It was just like kind of a chaotic moment. But, you got to thrive under pressure. And then you and me got it done.
Well, it's funny because, that morning we were talking about, content and whatnot. And it's like, hey, we've been pushing it pretty hard for a couple of weeks. Let's have an easier Friday. Let's put some stuff up in the morning and maybe go, handle some errands or just whatever, do what we each need to do. And then, Nasir Wyatt, okay, we got to handle that. And the next thing you know, Derrick Harmon, like, well, it's not a quiet Friday anymore. And we got the podcast done, for the Nasir Wyatt commitment. It's like, bam, Harmon. And so now we're doing the Harmon bit a couple of days later, which isn't our normal deal, but it's just, like you said, when it rains, it pours. And I don't think there's any Duck fans that are pretty upset with how Friday transpired. That's for sure.
Not at all. Not at all. And this isn't a slight to Peyton, obviously, but I think we can probably agree that Harmon's the bigger addition of the two. Just looking at the need on the roster and where the Ducks maybe had a little bit of deficiencies. And maybe that's not even fair to say because, Justin, a lot of these guys that are in the mix along the D line, they just haven't seen the field very much. So we don't really know what they can bring to the table. But that being said, you go into the transfer portal and add the top available interior defensive lineman in Harmon, 6'5", 320 pounds, originally from Detroit. This is a guy that is very much a plug and play starter for you alongside Jamari Caldwell, Jordan Birch, probably Mateo Uiagalelei, as you kind of just look at that projected starting line. But I mean, the waves that this addition made, I mean, people were like calling Dan Lanning a bully on social media. People are saying, like, to your point earlier about your story, like, oh, it's natty or bust for Oregon now. And just talking to some of the people in the USC market yesterday when I was at that camp, like, they were just talking about how, like, USC really needed that guy. Obviously they were one of the finalists, but USC really needed that because they just haven't had good defensive line play along the interior. Maybe not, I shouldn't say good, but enough quality, good interior defensive line play. And you're going to need it when you're going into the Big Ten. So that's just even more of why this is such a big addition for the Ducks.
Yeah, this was the piece. Like, this was the piece. If we just, if we sat back and we asked Dan Lanning, a week or two ago and said, hey, what's the one piece you need? Like, you only get one more transfer portal guy. Who would it be? And obviously it's got to be somebody available. We can't just throw out, the best name. But, with Derrick Harmon in there, I think if you had Dan Lanning privately, he would have said, I'd really like to add, an interior tackle on the defensive line, just getting, that body in there, that physicality. And Derrick Harmon was the best in the portal. At least in the spring window, he was the best in the portal in that fit. So I think Dan Lanning got exactly who he wanted. I think he played it well. I think Oregon was quietly in the mix, but just kind of held back. And then, when that thing kind of started getting maybe a little bit closer to the end there, they really pounced and came in with, I assume, would be a very competitive NIL offer. Not to mention, if you look at, Harmon and you say, look, and as we know it, the main schools involved are USC and Colorado, and maybe a return to Michigan State. At least out of that group, you say, hey, look at our team. We're in a great position for a national championship run. You want to come be a part of that? That's a big selling point if you're Oregon too. You're going to play in a defensive system that you'll excel in. For a defensive head coach, you've got two defensive line coaches, Tuioti and Tosh Lupoy, kind of, sharing those responsibilities. You're going to get really excellent coaching at your position and compete for national championship. I know Ohio State was also in the mix. That would have only been the other school that could really make that sell, I think, out of that group. So you put all that together and it just made a lot of sense for Harmon. And that was the one to me. I try not to get overly emotional and I try not to get too reactive on stuff. But when that one hit, that to me was like, this is a really good roster. I mean, it's a really good roster. Every position group, you can go and look at it and say, look, the starting group is solid. There might not be, too deep at every position on the offensive and defensive line and safety, but there's still really good players behind him that can come in and steady the ship when they need to give the guy a blow or an injury comes up or whatever. It's just and Harmon was it. Harmon was the piece to me. Love the Woodyard edition. I think it's phenomenal. It's great. But I think you and I can both agree that Derrick Harmon was the one that went, that was the one. That was the one. That one sent some ripples into the college football world.
That's certainly what it feels like. That's kind of the waves that this edition made for the Ducks. And I think another reason that this is such a crucial edition, Justin, like we kind of agreed, and I think we've spoken about this earlier, they didn't need Harmon. It wasn't do or die, but this is the guy that can take your D-line to the next level. And just when I look at last season and what worked for this defense, a huge part of it was rotating fresh bodies along the trenches, having guys that you don't need to ask to do a whole lot, but when you do have them on the field, they're able to be that much more effective, and it just helps your strategy that much more. And Harmon and Caldwell are just going to be forces along that interior. And then to have Birch and Mateo and a bunch of other guys, Keon Ware-Hudson, Amari Washington, Michael Gardner, maybe we see some of these true freshmen, Jericho Johnson, Aiden, like we're just saying these names, and I'm like, oh my God, this is just so much talent at one spot. I mean, I don't know if this is jumping the gun a little bit, but where do you think this line's going to stack up with like the Eric Armstead, DeForest Buckner 2014 D line? Because it feels like it's honestly getting there.
Yeah, those are obviously two premier guys that are, Buckner's having a tremendous NFL career. Eric Armstead's having a really good one too. Those are two premier guys, but let's be honest, it was those two guys and not really much else around them or behind them. This is different, okay? Maybe they don't have guys quite at that caliber, but they've got quite a few guys that aren't that far back, and they have way more depth. And you just rattled off, I don't know, 7 or 8 names, and that wasn't even any of the edge players. You didn't even mention Tuioti and some of the other guys that are playing on the edge. So, in terms of that combination, this is by far the best group. 1 through 5, 1 through 6, whatever number you want to come up with. If we're just talking about like 1 through 2, those two guys are pretty elite. But what I love about this, and here's my favorite thing about Harmon. Okay, you had some people saying, "Oh, he's not that great. He's overrated, and he's getting a premium because there's no defensive lineman available. There wasn't any offensive lineman either." You could see there was a major need. If anybody had needs in the transfer portal along the line of scrimmage, there was an abundance of great options. And Oregon not only went and got Caldwell, they got Harmon, and they got Bedford on the offensive line. They got 3 really good guys that pretty much anybody in the country would have wanted. And my favorite thing about Harmon is this. Harmon doesn't need to come in and be elite. He doesn't need to come in and be an absolute game changer, wrecker. He doesn't have to be Aaron Donald. He just has to be good because he's got really good players around him. He's going to come in, and because of his size and because of his experience and his strength, he's going to make Birch better. He's going to make Uyunglele better. He's going to make Jamari Caldwell better. And in turn, when those guys are doing really well and able to be disruptive, all of a sudden you can't double team Derrick Harmon. And now that becomes an issue for you. So again, this isn't like, hey, we need this guy and he needs to play at an elite level or we're screwed. He just needs to come in and play good ball. That's really all he needs to do. And he's going to know the Big Ten gauntlet because he's obviously played in it coming from Michigan State. He's not going to be afraid of winners. He grew up in Detroit. So just gotta love how that fits in. And again, like you said, this was a luxury pickup. This wasn't, but this took this room from maybe it being like, if we were grading it, maybe it was around a B. And I think, this bumps that group up at least to an A- if we're being conservative.
Just huge moves being made by Dan Lanning, Marshall Malco, and the rest of this staff in Eugene. It's really fun to watch. But for all of these big additions, Justin, you still got to line it up. You still got to put those pads on Saturday and get it done. And you got to figure out how to put this all the pieces of the puzzle together to hopefully make that national championship run. And maybe this is a good place to kind of start winding down the podcast. I put out this question on Twitter, and I want to get your opinion here, and then I'll give mine. But on the screen here, I said, given Oregon's recent recruiting success, this seems like a timely question to ask. What's your biggest what's your biggest concern or area of need for Oregon heading into the 2024 season?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of area of need, I think they've solidified everything. I mean, of course, you could always get better or a little better or whatever, but adding Harmon, adding Woodyard, those two pieces were perfect. They were seamless and perfect. That's what I would have added if I was Dan Lanning. Biggest area of concern is going to be the unknown to me, right? And what I mean by the unknown is you're going into a new conference. And yes, you might know that it's a very run-heavy and physical conference, but you don't really know until you're in the game, right? Okay, what's it going to be like traveling to Maryland? What's it going to be like traveling to Wisconsin? These are all new venues and new places that Oregon won't really know. Now, I understand you play no matter where you go, but we know that's not the case. For whatever reason, Tucson, Arizona had like this hex over Oregon, right? It was just the weirdest thing, right? We couldn't explain it. And you kind of wonder, okay, will there be any other schools or other cities that Oregon will now travel to that will have just like this weird voodoo over them? And so to me, it's, it is the unknown of entering a new conference. It is the unknown of just you're playing Oregon State early in the season and it's no longer a conference matchup. What does that mean? Like, I don't know. What will that look like? It's just going to be so interesting and so unique and so many great matchups. You've got Ohio State coming to town. Everybody and their mom has that freaking game circled because it's going to be epic. That to me is just the biggest area, concern. I feel really good about Oregon's coordinators because obviously you were able to retain both of your coordinators this offseason. That's huge. I think Dan Lanning has shown that, yes, he is a younger coach and is prone to mistakes, but is also very good at adapting and not duplicating those mistakes. So, yeah, he might, have missed a timeout or whatever the case might be here and there, and that's going to happen with a young guy. I think he's shown a lot of humility in the fact that he's able to grow from that. So for me, I guess it's that. To put a button on it, the best news, though, is it's no longer, because of the new playoff system, it's no longer you must win every game or you're going to get left out. Okay, you can now afford to lose to Ohio State, and if you win the rest of your games, you're more than likely still going to get a playoff shot if you're Oregon. So I do like that because in years past, it's been like, oh, we lost the game. We're either out or it's really uphill to get back in. And that's kind of gone just a little bit with the new playoff system. So it's just the unknown. I guess that's the way I describe it.
Sure. No, lots of really good stuff in that answer. I think for me, before the Peyton Woodyard edition, I would probably say safety. And that's not to say that they don't have talent in that room and they don't have good players in that room. I just don't know what it's going to look like. Like, the Ducks added Evan Williams last year, and then you had Brian Addison and Steve Stevens and some veteran guys, but the room wasn't where it needed to be. But now I feel like you can pretty confidently say this is a different caliber of talent and of player that they're working with. And they're going into a more run heavy conference. So that's going to help them if they're maybe not up to where they need to be in terms of coverage. You got bodies to rotate. You're confident in Chris Hampton. He continues to get better as a coach, and they just keep finding guys that are a great fit for them. And that's a big testament to the eval staff as well and their capabilities there. So I kind of want to say safety, but I'm also saying, like, I have confidence that they're going to be able to figure it out. Maybe just more of a question mark, not a concern, so to speak. And then the O-line depth. I think that you look really solid across the board with all your starters, but if someone needs to come in and give you a spell, who are we going to see, and what are those contributions going to look like? You have like a Dave Iuli, a Nishad Strother, who is a veteran guy but hasn't played very much. So you have some pieces to turn to, but not many of them have seen the field a whole heck of a lot. But either way, I mean, this roster is phenomenal, and it's by far and away the most talented roster the Ducks have had in my coming on 6 years covering this team, and man, I'm so stoked to see this team in action.
I think I really like your offensive line point, because what I would say about the offensive line and my concern is just that obviously going through the Big Ten, it's going to be tough. It's going to be physical. You're going to have some big defensive linemen. My biggest concern there, and if we're pinpointing something, would be at offensive tackle. And what I mean by that is Connerly and Ajani Cornelius are great. They're great. That's probably one of the best 1-2 combinations in the country at offensive tackle. My concern is, what if they're not available for whatever reason? If they get injured, they get dinged up in a game, the depth behind them at tackle would be probably my biggest concern on this roster, because quite frankly, that's a very physical position. It's easy to get rolled up on. It's easy to tweak an ankle. A lot of things can happen in the line of scrimmage there. That's an area where I think Oregon looks and says, we really got to make sure these two guys are healthy and good to go, because that would be, if either of them were to get injured, I just worried that drop off behind them at tackle is pretty significant.
Well, those will be a couple of storylines that we track when fall camp comes around, but that's in about 3 months. So we got plenty of time to stew that over and think about it, Justin. But yeah, we've hit on a lot of really good stuff here in this pod, broke down both of these commitments, feeling really good about that. As you guys know, the coverage over at Scoop Duck is awesome. Justin and I both had our RPMs in for Peyton Woodyard. I didn't put one in for Harmon because admittedly it was a little hard to get a beat on that one, but it did feel like the Ducks were probably going to get it done, although it just took a little while to get there. But yeah, try us out at Scoop Duck, $1 for 1 month. We have an awesome community over there. Justin and myself are both active on the message board, so it really just feels like I'm kind of hanging out with Duck fans when I go on the message boards. And it's just been an awesome time, and there's no better time to try us out. Any final marks before we get out of here, Justin?
No, just love that we're able to get all this content out, both video and online there, like you said, on Scoop Duck. Second thing is if you're still tuning in, Ducks could end up with another commit at the end of the week. The 4-star athlete running back Derrick Hill makes his commitment on Friday. So I think you've got your prediction in for Oregon. And I've been basically teasing that I'm going to put mine in and still haven't, but I'm pretty sure I will. But could be more good news on the way. So great time to stick with us and see if the ball keeps rolling.
Absolutely. Well, make sure you guys lock in with Justin on Twitter/X at JHopkinsSD. You can find more of me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at mtorresports. Subscribe to the Scoop Duck YouTube channel. Check us out on scoopduck.com and share the show. Share the Ducks Dish podcast with your friends, with your family, with other Duck fans, with everybody. But thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you guys in the next episode of the Ducks Dish podcast.